The world had never witnessed such a sudden surge of defiance from ordinary people. Across towns and villages, civilians, teachers, farmers, factory workers, and even children found themselves standing face to face with Hitler's armored juggernaut. Tanks, the epitome of modern warfare, rumbled toward their homes, their engines shaking the earth beneath the frightened feet of men and women untrained for battle. And yet, in the chaos of smoke, fire, and shouted orders, a remarkable phenomenon unfolded. Ordinary citizens became extraordinary combatants, finding ways to defy the most formidable military machinery the world had ever known. It began in small, often overlooked locations. A narrow bridge in a French village, a forest road outside a Polish town, or a city street barricaded with overturned carts became the stage for actions that would ripple across entire campaigns. Civilians, armed with nothing more than farming tools, Molotov cocktails, homemade explosives, and an intimate knowledge of their terrain, orchestrated ambushes that halted tanks and disrupted supply lines. Their ingenuity transformed the battlefield into an unpredictable environment, where mechanical superiority could be offset by human determination and local knowledge. In many cases, the first encounters were terrifying. Villagers confronted steel beasts that seemed invincible, their machine guns and cannons a deafening herald of destruction. Fear was natural, yet it became a catalyst for courage. Leaders emerged spontaneously, coordinating civilians who had never trained for combat. They identified weak points in enemy formations, pinpointed vulnerabilities in tank armor, and devised improvised weapons that could penetrate the mechanical shells. These individuals demonstrated that battlefield effectiveness was not solely dictated by training or rank, but by creativity, observation, and decisive action. One iconic example occurred during the German advance into France in 1940. As armored divisions rolled forward, a group of farmers on the outskirts of a small town noticed the tanks' over-reliance on roads and bridges. Recognizing that the vehicle's mobility depended entirely on the landscape, they sabotaged key access points. Bridges were weakened and camouflage traps laid in ditches and under footpaths. When the first tanks approached, several collapsed into hidden pits or became immobilized by obstacles. The Germans, initially baffled by the unexpected delays, had to commit extra manpower and engineering resources, creating an opening for organized French resistance fighters to counterattack. The combination of civilian ingenuity and military coordination effectively stalled what was intended to be a rapid blitzkrieg. In Eastern Europe, a similar pattern emerged. Villages in Poland and the Soviet Union witnessed civilians constructing barricades in forests and narrow alleys, slowing tank columns and forcing enemy soldiers into kill zones. Local knowledge was decisive. Residents understood the terrain's nuances. Soft soil that could trap heavy vehicles, riverbanks that could channel tanks into predetermined areas, and forests whose dense trees could restrict maneuverability. This expertise allowed civilians to stage ambushes with remarkable precision. Molotov cocktails and homemade explosives were employed with deadly effect, often disabling tanks entirely. Reports from German commanders described these actions as unexpected and unnerving, highlighting that the psychological impact on enemy troops was as significant as the physical damage. The narrative of civilian resistance was not confined to isolated actions. In multiple theaters, these spontaneous engagements created cumulative disruptions in the Nazi war machine. German supply chains, carefully engineered for speed and efficiency, were thrown into disarray by ambushes on critical routes. Communication lines were severed when civilians cut telephone wires or sabotaged telegraph poles, forcing units to operate with delayed or incomplete information. This created confusion and delays that compounded the effects of tactical errors, turning minor civilian actions into strategic outcomes that influenced entire campaigns. The courage displayed was accompanied by profound risk. Engaging tanks unarmed or with improvised weapons exposed civilians to immediate death. Yet the stakes compelled ingenuity and daring. Women, for instance, played key roles by using knowledge of local urban layouts to guide fighters, establish escape routes, or deliver incendiary devices to critical targets. Children, sometimes enlisted as messengers or lookouts, provided crucial intelligence about enemy movements. Elderly residents assisted in logistical support, transporting weapons and food, or preparing traps. Every member of the community contributed in ways that transformed ordinary citizens into a cohesive, adaptive, and deadly opposition. One remarkable account comes from a small town in Belgium, where civilians observed German tanks attempting to navigate the cobblestone streets. Using metal chains and hidden trenches, residents slowed the advance of armored vehicles, forcing them into bottlenecks where homemade explosives could be deployed. The tanks, initially invincible in the open battlefield, became vulnerable in confined urban terrain. German infantry supporting the armored units were pinned down, and the combined effect of civilian sabotage and resistance fighters resulted in a temporary withdrawal, a rare and morale-boosting victory against an enemy accustomed to rapid, overwhelming dominance. These encounters were characterized by extraordinary coordination achieved without formal military hierarchy. Civilians communicated using improvised signals, maps drawn in secret, and pre-established contingency plans. The learning curve was steep, trial and error often carried heavy costs. Yet the adaptability shown in response to failure was striking. If a barricade failed or a trap was discovered, new methods were quickly devised. Observational intelligence, careful study of tank movement, patterns in German patrols, and timing of supply convoys allowed civilians to refine strategies with remarkable speed. This iterative approach effectively transformed towns and villages into dynamic, unpredictable battle spaces where mechanical superiority was frequently neutralized. The impact extended to the morale of both sides. For civilians, every successful ambush, every disabled tank, reinforced the belief that resistance was possible. Communities became increasingly organized, establishing local committees to plan defenses, distribute tools, and coordinate with military units. The sense of agency empowered ordinary people, turning fear into determination. For German troops, encountering determined civilians shattered assumptions of easy domination. Reports emphasized that soldiers grew wary of even minor towns or villages, knowing that civilians were prepared to resist in innovative and unexpected ways. The psychological effect was significant. Hesitation, mistrust, and the need for cautious advancement slowed operations and diverted resources from strategic objectives. In addition to direct sabotage, intelligence gathering became a vital function of civilian resistance. Farmers and townsfolk observed tank movements, recorded troop deployments, and transmitted critical information to Allied forces. This intelligence enabled more effective counterattacks and strategic strikes, demonstrating that civilians could influence military outcomes far beyond isolated engagements. Coordination between on-the-ground observations and military planning created a network of actionable intelligence that magnified the impact of every act of defiance, blurring the line between civilian and soldier in ways that confounded German expectations. Civilian ingenuity also extended to psychological operations. Some communities employed deception tactics, creating dummy fortifications, fake artillery positions, and false obstacles to mislead German commanders. The illusion of prepared resistance forced the enemy to commit additional forces, expend ammunition, and delay advances, often buying precious time for organized military units to regroup. These operations, combining creativity, risk-taking, and local knowledge, illustrated that warfare could be waged with intellect and resourcefulness as effectively as with conventional arms. Across Europe, these efforts collectively contributed to the gradual weakening of the Nazi war machine. Each disrupted supply line, stalled tank, or sabotaged bridge compounded the challenges faced by German forces. The Blitzkrieg's reputation for invincibility was undermined not by conventional armies alone but by the combined, determined resistance of ordinary people. Civilians' actions demonstrated that the battlefield was not solely the domain of trained soldiers. The participation of communities, guided by knowledge, ingenuity, and courage, could decisively influence operational outcomes. The legacy of civilian resistance against Hitler's tanks illustrates the profound effect that ordinary people can have in shaping history. Every barricade, explosive device, and act of sabotage contributed to a larger strategic impact, altering timelines, slowing advances, and inflicting psychological as well as physical damage on the enemy. Their stories are reminders that courage is not the exclusive domain of armies, that strategic insight can emerge spontaneously in moments of extreme necessity, and that the human spirit can defy even the most mechanized and seemingly unstoppable forces. As German forces pressed deeper into occupied territories, the courage of civilians escalated from isolated acts of defiance to organized resistance networks. In towns and villages across France, Belgium, Poland, and the Soviet Union, ordinary citizens began to recognize the strategic value of their collective knowledge and initiative. Fields, forests, and urban landscapes, which had been merely familiar backdrops for everyday life, transformed into arenas of tactical opportunity. Each civilian engagement became part of a broader mosaic of defiance that steadily eroded the efficiency and psychological dominance of the Nazi war machine. The transformation was not sudden. It emerged from repeated confrontations where civilians observed patterns in enemy operations and exploited weaknesses in armored units. Farmers noted that German tanks struggled in marshy terrain and soft soil, where heavy vehicles could become bogged down. Merchants and townsfolk realized that narrow streets in small towns forced tanks into choke points, making them vulnerable to Molotov cocktails or concealed explosives. Children and teenagers, sometimes enlisted as scouts or messengers, provided critical intelligence on enemy patrols, timing, and positioning. Over time, these observations coalesced into systematic strategies that maximized impact while minimizing risk to the participants. One compelling example unfolded in a Polish village that had become a frontline during the early stages of the Eastern Campaign. The villagers, having observed repeated advances by German tanks along a main road, decided to sabotage the path with rudimentary yet effective traps. Trenches were dug at concealed locations, and hidden stakes and metal spikes were placed to puncture treads. Civilians constructed decoy barricades to lure tanks into prearranged kill zones, where homemade explosives disabled engines and immobilized vehicles. The German units, previously confident in their mechanized superiority, encountered a series of setbacks that delayed the advance and forced commanders to divert additional personnel to deal with civilian resistance. These acts were often accompanied by daring improvisation. In rural France, a group of women devised a method to tip fuel barrels into strategic ditches, creating both fire hazards and obstacles. The sudden flames forced German soldiers to retreat temporarily while attempting to extinguish the inferno, leaving tanks exposed to improvised attacks. In urban settings, local residents repurposed construction materials, bricks, timber, and metal railings, to form barricades that restricted mobility. Molotov cocktails, crafted from glass bottles and flammable liquids, became a powerful equalizer against armored vehicles, illustrating that creativity and resourcefulness could offset technological disparities. The scale of these civilian operations expanded as coordination increased. Resistance committees formed, often operating under extreme secrecy, connecting multiple villages and towns. Knowledge of terrain, enemy behavior, and logistical networks was shared among participants, enabling complex ambushes and diversions. For example, one network in northern France coordinated attacks on a German supply convoy spanning multiple towns. Civilians disabled several vehicles using a combination of explosives and physical barricades, forcing the remainder of the convoy to halt or reroute. This disrupted resupply efforts and forced German forces to stretch manpower thin, reducing the effectiveness of armored divisions and creating opportunities for organized military counterattacks. Intelligence gathering became an indispensable component of civilian resistance. Observers mapped enemy routes, recorded timing of tank movements, and identified weak points in German formations. This intelligence was then relayed to local partisan units, who used it to execute targeted strikes. Civilians often relied on subtle communication methods, signals using lanterns, coded notes hidden in everyday objects, or prearranged visual cues, to convey critical information without detection. Such integration of human intelligence into combat operations allowed ordinary citizens to influence decisions that had previously been reserved for professional military officers, demonstrating the strategic potency of organized civilian networks. The psychological dimension of these operations cannot be overstated. German soldiers encountered not just physical resistance but an environment of uncertainty. The knowledge that even a small village could harbor deadly obstacles or concealed attacks caused hesitation, eroded confidence, and forced commanders to commit additional reconnaissance and security measures. Civilians, aware of the fear they induced, used it to amplify the effectiveness of their actions. The presence of resistance, visible barricades, scorched roads, or unexploded traps, served as a constant reminder to the enemy that no advance was guaranteed, no territory uncontested. In addition to ambushes, civilians engaged in counterintelligence and deception. False road signs, camouflage dummies, and simulated artillery positions were used to mislead German reconnaissance, often diverting armored units into disadvantageous terrain. Factories and warehouses were repurposed as observation posts, allowing citizens to monitor troop movements and relay information to partisans and allied forces. These acts of ingenuity, though non-combat in nature, directly influenced battlefield outcomes by creating conditions where enemy confidence and operational efficiency were continuously undermined. The risk associated with these operations was immense. Participants faced immediate execution if discovered, and yet the majority persisted despite the threat. The courage displayed by women, men, and even children was remarkable. Teachers guided students in constructing traps, housewives transported explosives under the guise of daily chores, and farmers worked nights to prepare ambush sites along routes critical to the enemy. Each individual's contribution, no matter how seemingly minor, became part of an orchestrated effort that magnified the collective impact. Coordination with professional military units amplified the effectiveness of civilian action. In several regions, Allied forces recognized the value of local knowledge and integrated civilian intelligence into operational planning. Civilians would mark safe paths for troop movements, identify optimal locations for artillery strikes, and occasionally participate directly in sabotage missions that synchronized with larger offensives. The result was a dynamic interplay where civilian initiative complemented military strategy, demonstrating that effective warfare could extend beyond traditional hierarchies and training. One particularly notable incident occurred during the liberation of a Belgian town. Civilians, anticipating a German armored assault, prepared a series of roadblocks, concealed explosive devices, and organized volunteer lookouts. When the tanks arrived, they encountered multiple hazards that slowed the advance, inflicted mechanical damage, and forced infantry units to deploy in less than optimal formations. Allied forces, informed by local intelligence, arrived in coordination with these civilian efforts and executed a counteroffensive that resulted in significant enemy casualties and the capture of several tanks. The operation highlighted the decisive role that ordinary citizens could play in shaping the battlefield. The integration of civilian networks into broader campaigns created a multiplier effect. Small-scale acts of resistance, when repeated across multiple towns and coordinated over larger geographic areas, significantly disrupted German operational planning. Supply lines were interrupted, troop movements delayed, and armored divisions rendered less effective. Even when individual engagements were minor, the cumulative effect forced the enemy to divert resources, expend ammunition, and adopt more cautious tactics, reducing overall operational efficiency. This period also saw the emergence of intergenerational participation. Elders shared knowledge of terrain and history that aided strategic placement of traps and obstacles. Young people, often more agile and mobile, served as scouts or messengers. The combination of experience and energy, coupled with communal commitment, created resilient resistance networks capable of adapting to changing circumstances. Every ambush, every sabotage tank, and every misdirected convoy reinforced the strategic insight that civilians were not merely passive observers, but active participants capable of influencing the course of war. By the end of this period, the pattern was clear. Civilian resistance had become an integral part of the broader war effort. Ordinary people, equipped with ingenuity, courage, and intimate knowledge of their surroundings, consistently challenged the mechanized superiority of German armored divisions. Their actions slowed advances, inflicted casualties, disrupted logistics, and weakened morale. What began as spontaneous acts of defiance evolved into sophisticated networks capable of shaping the outcome of entire campaigns. The stories emerging from these operations underscore the capacity of ordinary citizens to influence extraordinary events. A teacher directing an ambush, a farmer exploiting terrain to trap a tank, a group of teenagers relaying intelligence. Each act, while small in isolation, collectively shattered the assumption that the Nazi war machine could operate unopposed. Their courage demonstrates that the battlefield extends beyond traditional combatants, that strategic impact can emerge from creativity, resourcefulness, and collective action. In reflecting on this phenomenon, one sees a consistent theme: empowerment through agency. Civilians, recognizing the threat posed by armored invaders, transformed fear into calculated resistance. Every decision, from constructing obstacles to relaying intelligence, carried the potential to alter the operational calculus of the enemy. Their actions, grounded in a deep understanding of local terrain and conditions, proved that ordinary individuals could confront mechanized power and achieve remarkable results, often shifting the trajectory of campaigns in ways that professional armies alone could not. The unfolding resistance in occupied Europe revealed a profound truth. The human spirit could confront mechanized warfare with intellect, creativity, and courage. By the time German armored units advanced into regions of France, Belgium, and Poland, civilians had transformed into proactive participants who not only slowed the enemy but actively shaped the battlefield. Every barricade, improvised explosive, and Molotov cocktail became part of a larger strategy, an organic, decentralized network of resistance whose cumulative effect challenged the Nazi perception of invincibility. In urban centers, the complexity of civilian operations increased dramatically. Cities and towns, with their dense streets and multi-level structures, became arenas where German tanks, despite their power, struggled to maneuver. Civilians exploited every architectural nuance, from narrow alleyways to hidden courtyards, turning familiar terrain into a strategic advantage. Resistance committees coordinated to place obstacles in key choke points, ensuring that enemy vehicles would encounter maximum disruption while minimizing the exposure of participants. Improvised barriers, including rubble, overturned vehicles, and reinforced wooden structures, created unpredictable hazards that forced tanks to slow, redirect, or risk immobilization. A striking example took place in a Belgian town near the Meuse River. Local civilians, anticipating an armored advance, constructed concealed ditches and reinforced them with hidden spikes and debris. When German tanks attempted to cross, several became trapped in the pits, their engines disabled and treads mangled. Infantry supporting these armored units were forced into exposed positions, where they faced concentrated fire from partisan fighters and armed civilians. The combination of terrain manipulation, improvised weaponry, and coordinated defense demonstrated that the battlefield could be reshaped by ingenuity, blurring the line between civilian and soldier. Civilians also perfected methods for exploiting the vulnerabilities of armored vehicles. Molotov cocktails, while simple in design, proved remarkably effective when deployed from elevated positions or confined urban corridors. Farmers and townspeople combined these incendiary devices with knowledge of tank weak points, such as engine compartments and treads, ensuring maximum impact. Small teams coordinated attacks so that even one tank's disabling would create a bottleneck, halting entire columns and amplifying the strategic effect. Repetition of these tactics across multiple towns compounded disruption, forcing German commanders to slow their advance and adopt more cautious, less efficient maneuvers. Beyond physical sabotage, intelligence gathering and observation became central to civilian resistance. Ordinary people monitored enemy movements, noted timing patterns, and recorded the composition of armored columns. This information, often transmitted to local partisan units, allowed for the precise timing of ambushes and targeted strikes. Observation posts were disguised in barns, attics, or forested areas, providing civilians with vantage points to track troop formations and communicate findings using covert signals. Such intelligence not only enhanced the effectiveness of direct action, but also facilitated coordination with professional allied forces, creating a unified approach to countering the German advance. Women played critical roles in these operations, often coordinating logistics, surveillance, and ambush preparations. In several towns, women maintained communication networks, transported essential supplies, and guided fighters through concealed paths. Their contributions extended to tactical execution, with some directly deploying incendiary devices or triggering traps. Children and teenagers assisted in intelligence gathering, relaying information between communities and observing patrol patterns. Elderly residents provided strategic insights, often drawing upon deep familiarity with the terrain and historical knowledge of local choke points. Together, these diverse contributions created a comprehensive civilian network capable of executing sophisticated operations against a technologically superior force. The cumulative impact of these actions was evident in reports from German officers. Commanders documented unexpected delays, unanticipated losses, and disruptions in supply chains. The psychological strain on troops was immense. Armored divisions, accustomed to rapid, unchallenged advances, confronted an environment of unpredictability and human ingenuity. Every ambush, barricade, and sabotage operation introduced uncertainty into planning, forcing commanders to adopt slower, more deliberate strategies. This hesitation, in turn, created opportunities for coordinated counteroffensives and reinforced the strategic significance of civilian resistance. The resilience of civilians was further demonstrated in rural areas, where knowledge of natural landscapes enabled innovative forms of resistance. Forests, rivers, and marshlands were transformed into tactical assets. Hidden trenches, camouflaged obstacles, and natural choke points were exploited to disrupt tank columns. Civilians devised ways to manipulate watercourses to flood roads or render soil soft and unstable, hindering tank movement. These techniques, combining environmental understanding with improvised engineering, illustrated a sophisticated approach to asymmetric warfare, where knowledge and creativity offset technological disparity. The integration of civilian resistance with organized military efforts enhanced effectiveness. Allied forces recognized the strategic value of local intelligence and coordinated attacks accordingly. Civilians provided detailed information on enemy positions, supply routes, and vulnerabilities, enabling targeted strikes that amplified operational impact. In several instances, civilians actively participated in joint operations, guiding troops through hazardous terrain, marking obstacles, or even joining in direct attacks on armored units. This collaboration demonstrated that warfare could extend beyond traditional hierarchies, with ordinary individuals exerting influence over outcomes typically determined by trained soldiers and professional command structures. One particularly notable engagement occurred in a northern French town, where a combination of civilian initiative and military coordination resulted in a decisive disruption of German armored forces. Civilians had constructed a series of concealed ditches, reinforced barricades, and improvised explosive devices along key access points. When the German advance arrived, multiple tanks became immobilized, forcing infantry into exposed positions where partisans and civilians engaged with lethal precision. The operation resulted in significant enemy casualties, the capture of equipment, and a temporary halt in the advance, underscoring the strategic potential of well-organized civilian resistance. The psychological dimension of these engagements cannot be overstated. German soldiers faced not only physical threats but a pervasive sense of uncertainty. Civilians' ability to adapt rapidly, exploit terrain, and employ unconventional tactics created an atmosphere of unpredictability that eroded confidence. Commanders were forced to adopt more cautious strategies, divert resources for reconnaissance, and reconsider assumptions about territorial control. The intangible effect, fear, hesitation, and mistrust, magnified the tangible impact of sabotage, barricades, and ambushes, illustrating that civilian actions could shape both operational and psychological facets of warfare. Civilians also engaged in deception tactics to amplify their influence. Fake barricades, dummy fortifications, and misleading signals misdirected enemy units, creating confusion and forcing the allocation of resources to non-critical areas. Factories, barns, and urban structures were repurposed as observation posts or decoy positions, further complicating German planning. By blending physical sabotage, intelligence, and deception, civilians created multi-layered challenges that disrupted both strategy and morale, demonstrating the comprehensive nature of their resistance efforts. Coordination and communication were key to sustaining effective operations. Despite limited technology, civilians established clandestine networks to transmit information, share tactical knowledge, and synchronize actions. Codes, signals, and prearranged cues allowed disparate communities to operate cohesively, often over large geographic areas. This decentralized yet coordinated approach ensured that localized acts of sabotage produced cumulative strategic effects, compounding the challenges faced by German forces and demonstrating that ordinary people could collectively shape the outcome of military campaigns. Civilians' participation extended beyond immediate tactical engagements. Communities engaged in logistical support, supplying fighters with tools, materials, and information essential for sustained operations. Fields became storage sites for explosives, hidden pathways facilitated rapid movement, and local knowledge of infrastructure enabled precise targeting of critical points. The integration of civilian infrastructure, insight, and initiative transformed ordinary towns and villages into dynamic components of broader operational planning. By this stage, it was evident that civilian networks were indispensable to the overall war effort. Their actions not only inflicted immediate damage but also generated strategic delays, diverted resources, and weakened morale. Each ambush, obstacle, or intelligence report contributed to a cascading effect that magnified the impact of Allied operations. Civilians, once perceived as non-combatants, had become decisive actors capable of shaping the course of campaigns and challenging the mechanized supremacy of German armored divisions. The collective efforts of ordinary people illustrated a critical principle. Warfare is not confined to the battlefield alone, nor is its outcome determined solely by technology or formal armies. Knowledge, creativity, and determination can transform civilians into agents of change capable of influencing operational outcomes. The cumulative effect of these actions disrupted German advances, slowed mechanized operations, and forced commanders to adopt cautious, less effective tactics, demonstrating that even in the face of overwhelming power, human ingenuity and resolve could prevail. In analyzing these events, historians have emphasized that the civilian contribution to resistance against armored forces was both tactical and strategic. Small-scale sabotage, intelligence gathering, and psychological disruption coalesced into broader patterns of influence that directly affected military planning, campaign timelines, and overall enemy effectiveness. The efforts of women, men, and children across multiple nations collectively demonstrated that ordinary citizens could confront and hinder one of the most advanced war machines in history, reshaping perceptions of both possibility and agency in the context of modern warfare. As the war progressed, the sophistication of civilian resistance intensified. Communities that had begun with isolated acts of sabotage now evolved into coordinated networks, capable of executing complex operations that rivaled those of conventional military units. In Belgium, France, Poland, and parts of the Soviet Union, civilians had developed methods for monitoring German troop movements, predicting armored maneuvers, and strategically placing obstacles that maximized the effect of every ambush. These actions, though often improvised, reflected an intricate understanding of mechanics, terrain, and timing, proving that ordinary citizens could orchestrate operations with remarkable precision. A recurring strategy involved the meticulous use of terrain. Forested areas became cover for ambushes. Narrow streets and alleys forced tanks into vulnerable positions. Rivers and marshlands were exploited to hinder mobility. Civilians learned to anticipate the routes favored by German armored units, planting obstacles at points where vehicles would naturally slow or concentrate. For instance, in a Polish village, a narrow bridge spanning a swampy channel was reinforced with hidden stakes and explosives. When German tanks attempted to cross, several became immobilized, and the accompanying infantry was forced into exposed positions where civilian marksmen and partisan fighters could engage them effectively. The operation, while executed without professional military guidance, exemplified tactical brilliance that directly influenced the operational tempo of enemy forces. Improvised weaponry played a crucial role. Molotov cocktails, though simple in design, proved highly effective when deployed with knowledge of tank vulnerabilities. Civilians learned to target engine compartments, fuel tanks, and treads, ensuring that even a single incendiary device could halt or damage multiple vehicles. Barricades, constructed from rubble, timber, and metal, were often disguised to appear inconspicuous until the moment of confrontation. Farmers, artisans, and laborers applied practical skills in carpentry, metalwork, and explosives to maximize the effectiveness of their creations. The result was a series of tactical interventions that consistently challenged the mechanical advantage of German armored units. Intelligence gathering was equally critical. Civilians established observation posts in barns, attics, and forested clearings to track enemy movements and relay information to local resistance cells. Signals, codes, and prearranged markers allowed communities to share data over large distances without alerting the enemy. In urban environments, children often served as messengers, exploiting their perceived innocence to transmit intelligence safely. Information on convoy schedules, tank positions, and supply routes was shared with partisans and allied forces, enabling precision strikes that maximized operational impact. The integration of civilian intelligence into military planning created a synergy that amplified the effectiveness of both groups, demonstrating that the knowledge of ordinary citizens could rival that of trained officers. Women emerged as pivotal figures in these operations. Beyond logistical support, they took on active roles in surveillance, sabotage, and communication. In towns across France, women maintained networks that provided intelligence on troop movements while coordinating safe passage for resistance fighters. They transported materials, guided operatives through concealed routes, and occasionally participated in direct confrontations with enemy forces. Their presence not only expanded operational capacity, but also introduced an element of unpredictability, as German forces often underestimated their involvement, allowing women to exploit this assumption with deadly effectiveness. Community involvement extended to children and the elderly as well. Teenagers acted as scouts, relaying crucial information about patrol patterns, supply routes, and enemy weaknesses. Elders contributed strategic insights, often drawing upon decades of local knowledge and familiarity with the landscape. In some regions, multi-generational cooperation became a hallmark of resistance, blending youthful agility with seasoned judgment. This collective engagement allowed civilian networks to operate efficiently, adapt to changing circumstances, and sustain prolonged campaigns against a technologically superior enemy. The psychological impact on German forces was profound. Armored units accustomed to swift, uncontested advances encountered an environment rife with hidden dangers. Barricades, ambushes, and concealed explosives created a sense of constant threat, undermining morale and forcing commanders to divert personnel and resources to reconnaissance and precautionary measures. Fear and uncertainty became as effective as physical barriers, illustrating that civilian resistance could influence both tangible and intangible aspects of warfare. Commanders reported delays, unexpected casualties, and logistical complications directly attributable to civilian interventions, highlighting the strategic significance of these non-traditional combatants. One illustrative case occurred during the German advance through northern France. Civilians had coordinated a series of ambushes along a critical supply route, combining barricades, ditches, and improvised explosives. When German tanks attempted to proceed, several became immobilized, leaving infantry vulnerable to attack. Partisans and armed civilians engaged the exposed soldiers, resulting in substantial losses and temporary disruption of the advance. Allied forces, informed by local intelligence, arrived shortly afterward to exploit the opportunity, capturing enemy equipment and inflicting additional casualties. The success of this operation underscored the decisive impact of coordinated civilian engagement and highlighted the value of integrating local knowledge into broader military strategies. Deception and misdirection further amplified civilian influence. Fake barricades, dummy fortifications, and misleading signals misdirected enemy units, forcing the allocation of resources to non-critical areas. Factories, barns, and urban structures were repurposed as observation posts, providing intelligence while concealing the true intentions of resistance networks. The interplay of physical disruption, psychological pressure, and strategic misdirection created multi-layered challenges for German commanders, demonstrating that civilian ingenuity could rival formal military tactics in complexity and effectiveness. Coordination and communication were essential to maintaining operational efficiency. Despite limited technological resources, civilians developed intricate networks to transmit information, share tactical knowledge, and synchronize actions across multiple towns and regions. Coded messages, visual signals, and prearranged routines allowed communities to function cohesively, ensuring that localized acts of sabotage contributed to a broader strategic impact. This decentralized yet coordinated approach transformed ordinary towns into dynamic components of a larger operational framework, enhancing the effectiveness of Allied campaigns and compounding challenges for German forces. Civilian participation was not limited to direct action. Communities provided logistical support, including transportation of materials, storage of explosives, and safe passage for resistance fighters. Fields became sites for concealed storage, homes offered refuge, and local knowledge of roads and terrain facilitated rapid movement and deployment. The integration of civilian infrastructure and expertise into operational planning created a multidimensional resistance capable of sustained impact, demonstrating that ordinary individuals could significantly influence the outcomes of military campaigns. As the war continued, the cumulative effects of civilian resistance became increasingly evident. German armored units, once considered unstoppable, faced persistent delays, mechanical failures, and casualties attributable to civilian sabotage. Supply lines were disrupted, operational timelines extended, and morale weakened. Ordinary people, through initiative, coordination, and ingenuity, challenged the technological and tactical superiority of one of the most formidable military forces of the era. Their actions exemplified the power of collective human effort in confronting overwhelming odds. The contributions of civilians in both urban and rural theaters reinforced the principle that warfare extends beyond conventional battlefields. Knowledge, creativity, and resolve enabled ordinary people to exert influence over strategic outcomes, demonstrating that mechanized power alone could not guarantee success. Each ambush, barricade, and intelligence report contributed to a cascading effect that altered the trajectory of German operations, underscoring the importance of human agency in modern warfare. These examples illustrate a broader theme. The integration of civilian networks into resistance movements transformed the dynamics of conflict. By exploiting terrain, employing improvised weaponry, gathering intelligence, and leveraging psychological pressure, ordinary citizens imposed disproportionate consequences on enemy forces. Their actions disrupted the rhythm of armored advances, created opportunities for counteroffensives, and ultimately contributed to the weakening of Nazi operational capacity. In examining these events, historians emphasize the tactical and strategic significance of civilian resistance. Small-scale sabotage, intelligence operations, and psychological disruption coalesced into larger patterns that directly influenced military planning and outcomes. The efforts of women, men, and children across multiple nations demonstrate that ordinary civilians could effectively confront and hinder advanced military machinery, reshaping assumptions about power, agency, and the capacity for resistance in wartime. By the later stages of the conflict, the cumulative effects of civilian resistance had fundamentally altered German operational strategy. Commanders, initially confident in the unstoppable nature of their mechanized divisions, faced an unprecedented challenge. Ordinary people, armed with little more than ingenuity, determination, and knowledge of their own landscapes, could dictate the tempo and effectiveness of military operations. Each town, village, and rural district became a strategic puzzle, where improvised barricades, ambushes, and intelligence networks combined to produce significant tactical consequences. The narrative of conventional power was challenged at every turn, revealing that even the most advanced weaponry could be undermined by human resilience and initiative. In the forests of Poland, civilians had mastered the art of camouflage and terrain manipulation. Fallen logs, mud-filled trenches, and concealed pitfalls were designed to disrupt armored columns, while minimizing the exposure of those implementing these defenses. The ingenuity involved went beyond simple obstruction. These communities engineered solutions that maximized the risk to enemy vehicles while protecting their own. For example, disguised ditches were lined with sharpened stakes or hidden explosives, ensuring that even a single miscalculation by a German tank operator could immobilize multiple vehicles. These tactics not only caused material losses but also forced commanders to adopt slower, more cautious approaches, undermining operational momentum. Urban centers provided a different set of challenges for German troops. Civilians, familiar with narrow streets, alleyways, and multi-story buildings, turned these features into strategic advantages. Barricades constructed from rubble, vehicles, and reinforced structures forced tanks into confined spaces where their mobility was limited and vulnerability increased. Molotov cocktails, deployed from windows, rooftops, and hidden vantage points, exploited weaknesses in armor design. Civilians also used distraction and misdirection effectively. False barricades and dummy structures drew enemy attention away from true points of vulnerability. In some cities, coordinated efforts between partisans and civilians created ambushes where infantry and armored units alike were funneled into kill zones, resulting in disproportionately high casualties for the attacking force. The psychological impact on German soldiers cannot be overstated. Armored divisions, accustomed to rapid, uncontested advances, encountered a pervasive sense of unpredictability. The combination of physical obstacles, intelligence-gathering networks, and the constant threat of ambush created heightened stress, eroding confidence and reducing operational efficiency. Commanders frequently noted delays and unexpected losses attributed to civilian actions, demonstrating that the human factor, courage, creativity, and resolve, could undermine even the most formidable technological advantage. The war, often considered a clash of machines and armies, was profoundly reshaped by the influence of ordinary people acting with intention and intelligence. Women's contributions reached remarkable levels of sophistication during this period. Beyond their roles in logistical support and communication, many became frontline participants in resistance operations. They coordinated intelligence networks, guided fighters through concealed routes, and directly engaged enemy forces when necessary. Women leveraged assumptions about their non-combatant status to conduct reconnaissance and execute sabotage with precision. Their involvement not only increased operational capacity but also introduced a degree of unpredictability that German forces struggled to counter, amplifying both the practical and psychological impact of resistance activities. Children and teenagers, often underestimated, played critical roles in intelligence gathering and message delivery. Their mobility and perceived innocence allowed them to operate under enemy scrutiny, relaying critical information about patrol patterns, convoy movements, and weak points in armored formations. In combination with adult operatives, these youthful contributions created comprehensive intelligence networks that enhanced the strategic reach of resistance movements. Elderly civilians, drawing upon extensive local knowledge and historical understanding of terrain, provided guidance for positioning barricades, ambush sites, and observation posts. The intergenerational cooperation demonstrated the adaptive capacity of civilian networks, reinforcing the principle that effective resistance could emerge from the collective efforts of entire communities. Rural areas offered unique opportunities for resistance. Farmers, shepherds, and laborers exploited their intimate understanding of the land to disrupt German operations. Marshes, rivers, and dense forests were integrated into tactical plans, with watercourses manipulated to flood roads or soften soil, hindering the movement of tanks and heavy vehicles. Hidden trenches, camouflaged obstacles, and natural choke points magnified the effect of even small-scale interventions. These environmental tactics showcase the capacity for strategic ingenuity in the absence of formal military training, emphasizing that terrain mastery could serve as a force multiplier against technologically superior opponents. Civilians did not operate in isolation. Coordination with Allied forces increasingly enhanced the impact of their actions. Information collected by local networks was shared with military units, enabling targeted strikes, precise ambushes, and effective utilization of resources. Partisan and civilian collaboration allowed Allied forces to exploit German vulnerabilities that would have otherwise gone unnoticed. In multiple instances, civilian guidance enabled troops to navigate treacherous terrain, avoid ambushes, or strike critical points with maximum effect. The integration of civilian networks into broader operational frameworks demonstrated that warfare was no longer confined to traditional combatants and formal hierarchies. It had become a collective endeavor where ordinary people directly influenced outcomes. Several notable operations exemplified the cumulative effect of civilian resistance. In northern France, a combination of barricades, concealed ditches, and Molotov attacks halted a German armored column, leaving infantry vulnerable and enabling partisans to inflict significant casualties. In Belgium, civilians created false fortifications and strategically placed explosives to mislead and disrupt enemy forces, creating delays that allowed Allied troops to execute coordinated offensives. In Poland, the meticulous manipulation of natural terrain, combined with concealed observation posts and rapid communication networks, effectively neutralized enemy advantages in several key operations. These events highlighted the strategic value of civilian ingenuity, demonstrating that sustained, coordinated action could challenge even the most formidable military machine. The cumulative effect of these operations extended beyond immediate tactical victories. German commanders were forced to allocate resources for reconnaissance, engineer countermeasures, and slow their advances, disrupting broader campaign objectives. Civilians, through ingenuity and persistence, created conditions where mechanical superiority was mitigated, operational timelines extended, and morale undermined. The narrative of unstoppable armored divisions was consistently challenged by communities that had learned to adapt, innovate, and resist under extreme pressure. Each ambush, barricade, or intelligence report contributed to a cascading effect, demonstrating the profound influence of ordinary people on the strategic environment. Deception and misdirection remained critical components of resistance. Civilians employed dummy barricades, decoy fortifications, and misleading signals to divert attention and resources from genuine strategic points. These measures not only inflicted direct losses but also induced confusion, forcing German commanders to exercise caution and slow operations. By combining physical sabotage, intelligence, and psychological manipulation, civilian networks created a multi-layered defense that continually tested enemy assumptions and capabilities. The integration of deception into tactical planning illustrated an advanced understanding of both human and mechanical vulnerabilities, further enhancing the strategic impact of civilian action. The role of logistics in sustaining resistance cannot be overstated. Communities provided secure storage for materials, concealed routes for movement, and resources necessary for sustained operations. Fields, barns, and homes were repurposed to support sabotage activities, maintain communication networks, and ensure the safety of operatives. By transforming civilian infrastructure into functional components of resistance, communities extended operational reach, increased effectiveness, and enabled prolonged engagement with enemy forces. The adaptability of these networks illustrated a remarkable capacity for strategic planning and execution in the absence of formal military oversight. By the closing stages of conflict, civilian resistance had achieved tangible and symbolic victories. German armored units, despite technological advantages, faced persistent disruption, material losses, and psychological strain. Supply lines were interrupted, operational timelines extended, and morale consistently challenged. Ordinary individuals, through determination, creativity, and collaboration, demonstrated that strategic influence could be exerted without formal training or resources. These efforts not only altered the course of specific engagements but also reshaped broader operational planning, forcing enemy commanders to reconsider assumptions about control, predictability, and dominance in occupied territories. The lasting legacy of civilian resistance lies in its demonstration of human ingenuity and resilience in the face of overwhelming force. By combining tactical innovation, intelligence gathering, psychological disruption, and collaborative action, ordinary people transformed the theater of conflict. Their contributions challenge conventional narratives of war, emphasizing that courage, knowledge, and coordination can rival technological superiority. The actions of these civilians stand as a testament to the power of collective agency, revealing that ordinary individuals, when organized and motivated, can shape the outcome of even the most advanced military campaigns. In reflecting upon these events, historians emphasize that civilian engagement during World War II redefined the concept of the battlefield. It demonstrated that influence extended beyond soldiers, that intelligence could be gathered by non-combatants, and that tactical ingenuity was not the sole domain of trained officers. The cumulative impact of these efforts, barricades, ambushes, intelligence networks, deception strategies, and logistical support, underscored the transformative role of civilian participation in shaping outcomes that, at first glance, seemed determined by technology and formal command alone. The stories of towns, villages, and rural communities who confronted Hitler's armored divisions illustrate a profound truth. Resistance is not confined to soldiers or official combatants. Knowledge, creativity, and resolve can transform ordinary citizens into decisive actors. Their collective efforts delayed enemy advances, inflicted material losses, undermined morale, and contributed to strategic victories. In doing so, they challenged assumptions about the nature of power in warfare, proving that even against a formidable mechanized force, human ingenuity and resilience can prevail. As the war drew to a close, the significance of civilian resistance became evident. The disruption of German operations, the protection of Allied forces, and the preservation of communities were achieved not solely through conventional military engagement, but through the coordinated, courageous actions of ordinary people. These individuals, often overlooked in traditional accounts of warfare, had shaped history through initiative, cooperation, and unwavering determination. Their legacy stands as a powerful reminder that the human factor, ingenuity, courage, and collective effort, can rival technology and strategy in determining the outcomes of war.